Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Good morning. We are from Group 1 and we will present about types and categories of translation. And in the last book, you can see the material as your text. So, let's check this out.
Types and categories of translation. After studying the definition of translation, you should also study the types and categories of translation in order to have a wider scope of it. Catford divides translation into three distinctive types, namely, first, full translation versus partial translation. The distinction between full and partial translation related to the extent of source language text which is submitted to the translation process. In a full translation, the entire text is submitted to the translation process. That is, every part of the source language text is replaced by the target language text material. For example, Indonesian. Aku cinta Indonesia. In English, I love Indonesia. Dia akan pergi ke sana. He will go there. Mereka tidak membeli apa-apa. They didn't buy anything. In a partial translation, however, some parts of the source language text are left untranslated. They are simply transferred to and incorporated in the target language text, either because they are regarded as untranslatable or for the deliberate purpose of introducing local color into the target language text, or even because they are so common and frequently used that translation is not needed. Example, I like hamburger. Saya senang hamburger. Rock Hudson died of AIDS. Rock Hudson meninggal karena AIDS. We need microfilm. Kami memerlukan mikrofilm. The UNDP is funded by the UNESCO. UNDP dibiayai oleh UNESCO. Orang hutan itu sejenis monyet. The orang utan is a kind of ape. Do you notice any important change with the words underlined above in the translation? Hamburger, AIDS, UNDP, and UNESCO stay the same graphically, yet perhaps they change phonologically or pronunciation. But microfilm undergoes both spelling and pronunciation change. Microfilm, microfilm. In the same way, the Indonesian orang hutan becomes orang utan, a change in both spelling and pronunciation in English.
The second type is total versus restricted translation. The distinction between total and restricted translation relates to the levels of language involved in translation. In total translation, source language, grammar, and lexis are replaced by equivalent target language, grammar, and lexis. This replacement entails the replacement of source language phonology or graphology by target language phonology, graphology. For example, the child has slept for 3 hours. Anak itu telah tidur selama 3 jam. Restricted translation at the grammatical and lexical levels means, respectively, replacement of source language grammar by equivalent target language grammar, but with no replacement of lexis, and replacement of source language lexis by equivalent third language exists but with no replacement of grammar. For example, replacement of grammar. Anak itu telah tidur selama 3 jam. Anak itu, noun that, telah tidur aux verb selama preposition 3 jam that noun, Indonesian. Anak itu, that noun, telah tidur aux verb 3 selama preposition 3 jam that noun, English. And in replacement of Lexis, anak itu telah tidur selama 3 jam. Anak itu, child that, telah tidur already sleep selama 3 jam 3 hour. The last type is rank of translation. The third type of differentiation in translation, according to Catford, relates to the rank in grammatical hierarchy at which translation equivalent is established. This rank translation can be in the form of word-to-word translation, group-to-group translation, sentence-to-sentence translation, paragraph-to-paragraph translation, discourse-to-discourse translation. In this type of translation, lexical and grammatical adjustment should be applied to achieve equivalence in terms of meaning. The lexical and grammatical adjustment will be discussed more deeply in modules 3 and 2 respectively.
Okay, alright. Introduce myself. My name is Umo. I will continue the explanation from my friend. I will explain the Jacobson theory. You can open your book, page 4. I will try to explain according to my understanding because I'm trying to understand the content of the material in the book. I'm a little confused. Okay, fine. Well, next on the material. In his article on linguistic aspect of translation, Roman Jacobson distinguishes 3 types of translation. Number 1, intralingual translation. Intralingual translation is a translation done in the same language. This translation translated into a language that is by communicating again to a meaning from a different text in the same language. Let us say that an unfamiliar Indonesian text was translated with a more general wording. Jadi tipe yang pertama ini adalah penerjemahan yang dilakukan pada bahasa yang sama, yaitu mengkomunikasikan kembali suatu makna dengan teks yang berbeda di bahasa yang sama. Misalkan saja suatu teks berbahasa Indonesia yang kurang familiar diterjemahkan kembali dengan pilihan kata yang lebih umum. Okay, next, number 2, interlingual translation. Interlingual translation is from a search language to a target language. This drop transferred the text directly into the language of both meaning and application. It is interlingual translation that we are familiar with translation in general. Suppose translation from English to Indonesian, a translation Indonesian to English, and so on. Jadi, tipe yang kedua ini adalah alih bahasa dari suatu bahasa sumber ke suatu bahasa sasaran. Penerjemahan inilah yang kita kenal dengan penerjemahan secara umum. Misalkan penerjemahan dari bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia dan sebaliknya. Okay, next, number 3, intersemiotic translation. Intersemiotic translation is a translation from the verbal to the non-verbal, a written language. This translation is usually found in subtitles. For example, film players speak English while the subtitle is Indonesian. This is the interpretation from verbal to non-verbal. Jadi tipe yang ketiga ini adalah penerjemahan dari alih bahasa verbal ke bahasa non-verbal atau tertulis. Biasanya ditemui di subtitle film. Misalkan, biasanya pemeran film berbahasa Inggris tetapi subtitlenya berbahasa Indonesia. Inilah yang dinamakan bahasa verbal ke bahasa non-verbal. Okay, based on the above my description, it can be concluded that translation is not only applied to a different language, but is enabled to translate to the same language. Even the translation from verbal to written language is also called translation. Okay, that's all I can explain. Thank you for your time.
Savory categorizes translation proper into 4 types as follows. Number 1 is perfect translation. All purely informative statements, such as are encountered by the traveler, are used by the advertiser. For example, at some air terminal, there hang notice boards with the following messages. Important: please ensure that your baggage is correct before leaving the air terminus. Attention! Messieurs/passengers on please the very large baggages upon the equator el arrière. Perhatian, silakan memeriksa barang-barang Anda sebelum meninggalkan pelabuhan udara. Number 2 is adequate translation, or for mere entertainment. Into the second category fall a very large number of almost characterless translations made for the general reader who may use them without giving a thought to the fact that what he is reading was not originally written in his own language. For example, English pop novels translated into Indonesian. Number 3 is composite translation. This includes the translation of prose into prose, of poetry into prose, and of poetry into poetry. The translator may spend a very long time on his work, so that the commercial value of the translation is often neglected. He would only get the intellectual exercises and then keep intellectual pleasure that results from the effect. For example, Laki-Laki Tua dan Laut translated by Sapadi Djoko Damono from The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway.
Four is the translate of all learned scientific and technical methods. Scientific and technical translating has certain characteristics among others. A. These translations are made solely because of the intrinsic importance of the original work, an importance that is strictly confined to the practical business of living. For example, Elsie Pun's Medalist was translated into Japanese only because the Japanese need to know the principle of heredity. B. The translator shall have a reasonable knowledge of the science or technique about which the original was written. This will help the translator maintain accuracy, clearness, and precision of the concept. To translate an English text on disease, you should have a medical background, otherwise your translation will be misleading.
Okay, this is the end of our presentation. So, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask us. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.